As one of the first mainstream automakers to bring an electric vehicle to market, Nissan has helped many people get behind the wheel of their very first EV.
Over 600,000 of them, over 600,000 Nissan Leafs have been sold across the world.
And I've owned two. My first Nissan Leaf was one of the very first off the production line in Japan. It missed the devastating tsunami of 2011 literally by a few days. And in my ownership, Hiro Nakamura, as we came to call the car, covered over 85,000 miles before I left the UK and moved to the US, where we purchased a used Nissan Leaf, which we drove to well over 90,000 miles. And frankly, I liked both of the Leafs, but, well, electric hatchbacks are no longer sexy or exciting or
sold
because the auto industry has convinced itself that everybody wants an SUV, which is why we are here today with the 2023 Nissan Ariya e-4orce. This is the premium.
Did you not read the press release?
No.
Oh, it says specifically that you don't pronounce it e-4orce.
But there's a number 4. It's E-number 4 O-R-C-E. E-4orce.
Yes, I know. But in the press release, in the quite long press release, I will grant, it does explicitly say that we have agreed to call it the e-4orce.
The e-4orce.
Yes, because as you will, I'm sure, surmise, the force is strong in this one.
Right, okay. I mean, it comes from, obviously, the Star Wars tie-in a couple of years ago. This is the all-wheel drive version of the Nissan Ariya. The two-wheel drive version has been out for some time, but this is the all-wheel drive version. It's the same variant, effectively, that I drove a couple of months ago in California, and I really liked it back then. I thought it was a pretty decent car, but I was driving it on a road that was carefully planned route-wise by Nissan North America, so obviously it would show off the car's best bits. When we have a press car on loan, we get to drive it where we want. So let's find out if the e-4orce is strong with this one.
Or if this is not the car you're looking for.
Ha, Kate, come on. It's not exactly quick, is it?
I mean, it's not going to make the kettle run in 18 parsecs now, is it?
No. But then that would assume that either I or you are a giant, fluffy animal.
Oh, that's clearly not the case.
No, not at all. That
No.
would be just wrong.
Yeah.
I like how this car feels very much like the Nissan Leaf, and I think that's probably a good thing if you're a Leaf owner and you want to upgrade to this car. It kind of makes a lot of sense. There are, however, some things that are different, and I'm not sure that all of the things are good. The controls obviously are pretty much the same. The Pro Pilot is kind of cool. The thing I don't get is the fact that in sport mode, which is what we're in right now, we get an artificial noise piped into the cabin. In every other mode, we get nothing.
I think if you absolutely floor it in normal mode, you get a quiet version of that noise. But yeah, to me, honestly, there didn't seem to be a huge amount of difference between those two modes, normal and sport, other than the noise.
And it's quite subtle too. And it sounds a little bit like the Choir of Angels from the Hyundai Kia family of vehicles.
Yes, they have that. As you go forward, only theirs is in tune, unlike mine.
And this one is so very subtle indeed. There's a lot going on in the dashboard as well, but you can change the dashboard mode. I don't know if you played with this much.
Yeah, I had a little play with it. It was quite distracting because I was actually trying to do something else at the time. I'm sure we will come to this a little bit later, but you and I have slightly different feelings about the interface in this vehicle. But when I was doing that, I was like, oh, no, that's how you change the dashboard? Okay. And it does have some interesting modes.
I like this kind of faux analog gauges. I like faux analog gauges as long as there is a digital representation, which is what we've got here. And that makes my life feel a lot happier, because I like a digital speedo. I also like the fact that the metric indication is here, giving you kilometers per hour, just off to the side there, should you wish it. I really like that. This gauge here on the left always feels a little cluttered to me, though. It's got a lot of information in a short space, and when we've got all of this kind of just sitting there most of the time.
Yeah, a lot of writing that I don't think is really terribly necessary.
Efficiency is something that you and I have disagreed on. So this is a big vehicle, and being a big SUV, it's not going to be particularly efficient. And I feel like you have said you wanted it to be more efficient, and your e-Niro, which is significantly smaller.
I wanted this to be more in the ballpark of the Ioniq 5, and it is not.
Well, we're seeing 2.9 miles per kilowatt hour since we charged it. That includes you driving 120 miles on the freeway this morning, because you had this car up at yours overnight.
Yeah, but it said 2.6 when I got to yours. So
it was 2.6.
So this is now a chunk of driving much more slowly on B roads like this. Yeah, I saw something similar, 2.5, 2.6 when I took it up to Seattle. And again, in neither case was I hooning.
Right.
I was driving close to or below the speed limit on the way up to Seattle. It was a lot of traffic, so it was pretty slow.
I've seen it get like 3.5, 4 while I was driving it last week. But yeah, 3 seems to be where it's most happy.
And I gather, I accept that for the size of vehicle, I don't think it's particularly terrible, and it's vastly superior to driving a gas car. But I also think that given how long Nissan have been building EVs and the state of the technology that's available, I would like it to be better.
We've seen a lot worse in terms of energy efficiency as well. So the BZ4X wasn't particularly efficient, and I think this is actually slightly better than the BZ4X in terms of efficiency. At the moment, we're in the coast range, we're driving up and down mountain passes, and that's obviously going to give us some issues when it comes to efficiency. But for the most part, I feel like we're getting what I would expect of a vehicle this size. Now, do I have a problem with automakers making cars that are less efficient than previous generation ones? Absolutely. And I think this is something that, as an industry, that needs to be solved pretty quick.
I think the obsession that has developed with building large SUVs, which are more profitable, but not as efficient, is definitely a trend that I am desperate to see reversed, but I very much doubt it's going to happen, at least in the near future.
Let's discuss how the driving experience has been. I quite like the feedback that I'm getting from the throttle, although there is a really disconcerting thing when you put the E-step on, which is this button down here, and finding it while you're driving is a bit of a pain in the butt. When you put E-step on, you effectively get single pedal driving mode, and when you lift off the throttle, what happens is the brake moves away from you. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but everybody on the team who's driven this car has complained about it.
Yeah, I think I wish I could remember which other vehicle we've encountered that in. I have a feeling it was the Mercedes does that as well. And I find it very uncomfortable because the place that you expect the brake to be should be the same every time. And the amount that you want to press it for something to happen should be the same every time. And by moving it, it takes that away. And particularly with this vehicle where I find that the brake doesn't have a lot of feel anyway.
I would agree with that.
So identifying what's going to happen when you're pushing the brake. I mean, to be fair, it has all the driver assistance systems that you can shake a stick at. So it's unlikely that you're going to do anything terribly stupid when you push on the brake a bit harder than you're expecting to, or you push on it a bit less than you're expecting to. But I still find that a really odd decision. And you mentioned the haptic controls being difficult to find. I mean, the ones that aren't in your line of sight mean that you have to look away from the screen. And it's whether or not the E-step sticks between resets, between turning the car off and on again, is a little unclear because we are, as usual, in guest mode in this vehicle. It may be that is something that you can set that stays in other driver profiles, but in guest mode it's reset every time. So every time you get in the vehicle you have to press it, and if you don't remember then you have to hunt for it when you're driving.
Right. I also, as you brought up driver assistance systems, I think I need to give Nissan some props here for the head-up display. It's very clear and easy to use.
Yes.
It's a lot better than a lot of head-up displays in more expensive vehicles that I've experienced. It's telling me right now that the speed limit is 55. It's telling me, you know, when I have navigation on, it tells me where the navigation is. It's fairly straightforward about that information, and it doesn't kind of take much to look down, and that means that your eyes primarily stay head up in front of the vehicle at all times. I wish that there was a little bit more choice over what information to display in the head-up display. When you have ProPilot engaged, it does show ProPilot status in the head-up display. But let's talk about ProPilot. This is the Premier Plus, which makes me think of Premier Inn in the UK. But it's got ProPilot as standard. This ProPilot is the latest iteration. It's come on a long way since it was first introduced in the Nissan Leaf and other vehicles. It's now got hands-off capabilities, but only on certain mapped roads. So very much like Super Cruise and Blue Cruise and any other number of hands-off systems that are now being pushed by automakers. The thing that really bugs me, and I don't know if it bugged you, is that instead of it being green when you can take your hands off the wheel, it's blue, which in my head doesn't equate to being the highest level, and I've always had a problem with that. Did you find that too?
I mean, it didn't actually bother me. I understand why that would be a little kind of niggling factor for you, but for me, I was like, oh, it's green, oh, it's gone blue, and it doesn't show, it shows your hands off the wheel in the icon, which I found pretty clear and consistent. And when it tells you that you need to put your hands on the wheel, it's very clear about that.
It's very clear about it.
I will say the experience of the mapping was very different. Driving down to Portland today, I tried to capture some B-roll of it not doing the mapping, and I failed. It only did it twice, and it did it 2 times once I turned the camera off because I was like, I give up. It's going to be an hour and a half of footage to look through. This is going to be no fun. But on the way up to Seattle, it was very intermittent. It would be mapped, not mapped. Roadworks, mapped, not mapped. And that was quite frustrating because you're just sort of intermittently going, oh no, hands on, no, hands off, no, hands on, no, hands off, no. The other thing that I found this morning and yesterday is that at times it can be very insensitive to you having your hands on the wheel. In fact, the only way I could consistently demonstrate having hands on the wheel was to have both hands at 10 to 2 on the steering wheel. if I had one hand on the steering wheel, or, which obviously I wouldn't do, if I had one hand on the steering wheel and, you know, one hand lower down or one hand resting lower down on the wheel, then it would say I needed to put my hands on the wheel. And then even if I shook it quite vigorously, about an inch at one point, I was moving the wheel backwards and forwards, and the car was going, no, you don't have your hands on the wheel, I need some steering input, which is difficult. It is, frankly, I found it very annoying. This is a vehicle that I have cursed several times, which I feel bad about, and I keep saying this, you know, this is going to be a great car for many people, but for me, as someone who really enjoys driving, it's just not quite cut the mustard for me.
Now that we have switched around, I'm going to let everybody in on the secret as to why we didn't discuss specifications.
Yeah, the secret is this car makes me incredibly nauseous.
No, you suffer from travel sickness as a passenger in a car on a fairly regular basis. You quite easily get nauseous.
Yeah, and less so in EVs, but it is certainly the case that in general, particularly in the back, you do not want me travelling in the back, not unless you want your car redecorated. But this is the first vehicle I have been in, I've got to say, in years, where driving it has made me nauseous.
That's really unfortunate. And I mean, I made myself feel nauseous driving the really, really high power Porsche Taycans. I've made myself feeling slightly nauseous driving the Mustang Mach-E, the GT version, the GT Performance. But that was because it was a twisty road and I was driving it hard. This is just a mountain pass and we're driving it at a sensible amount. But to ask you to look at the specs on your phone, that would have been cruel. So because this is the Platinum Plus e-4orce version of the Ariya, this has got 290 kilowatts combined at the wheels, and it's also got 442 pound-feet of torque, which is 800. Sorry, no, it's not. It's 600 Newton meters. I put that in incorrectly. I corrected myself because I remember doing that earlier. It's not exactly performance happy, is it?
No, I mean, you're not going to be buying this as a vehicle to go rallying in. You're not going to be driving this with that kind of vigour that you'd expect if you were thinking, oh, it's a four-wheel drive, oh, it's got some power. No, it's not going to be winning your stoplight Grand Prix. It's a very measured power delivery as well.
It's a measured power delivery, but I think there's also an element here that ever since Carlos Ghosn left Nissan has changed its attitudes to EVs. I don't know if you've noticed it.
Yes, I have.
So with Carlos Ghosn, it was very much, hey, we're going to be making electric vehicles, we want to lead electric vehicles, the world's going to be awesome. And now they've got somebody else in charge of Nissan, and it's much more cautious. It's more about the Nissan hybrid drivetrain than it is about Nissan EVs. And I think that is a real noticeable thing that we need to acknowledge. And I think that the Ariya is a representation of that attitude change.
It does feel like the Ariya is a car they feel like they need to make, rather than a car that they're excited to make.
And the specifications with that, are borne out. This car is available as a two-wheel drive or a four-wheel drive. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're not even going to touch on the two-wheel drives because it's got less power, right? The all-wheel drive version, the e-4orce, I will use the name that Nissan has asked us to use. You can get the entry-level version, the Engage e-4orce, which has just a 250 kilowatt drivetrain, which feels really underpowered for a vehicle of this size.
Yeah, I mean,
it's 5,000, 4 to 5,000 pounds, depending on the variant you have, which is, look, it's heavy. The entry-level version has a 63 kilowatt-hour usable battery pack. This one has an 87 kilowatt-hour usable battery pack.
And you feel every ounce of that.
You do. And it's got not necessarily the quickest charge time, so Nissan's not gone with like 800 volt technology. It's kept with 400 volt, and that means that the maximum charge rate on these vehicles is 130 kilowatts. And so we're looking at a 40-minute recharge time.
Yes.
Now, if this had a 20-minute recharge time and it was an 800 volt technology, I think this would be a much more compelling vehicle.
I think that's true. I think for someone who wanted this as a long-legged vehicle, because it could be a great car for someone who wants to go long distance with the kind of range that it has and the size of battery that it has. But then the charging is kind of lackluster on that side. So, and that's actually something that I feel about much of the vehicle. Like, it's that close to being really, really good.
Well, I mean, it's things like it has a level 2 charging on board, right? That is really under-spec'd. If you have that larger battery pack and you want to charge at a level 2 home charging station, it quotes 14 hours from empty to full.
Yeah. I drove to Seattle and back, which for some people would be their daily commute. And it took 8 hours to fill itself back up.
Right. Which feels weird, you know. My sister-in-law has just purchased a Bolt EUV, an entry-level Bolt EUV, I might add. So a car that's significantly less expensive than this. And it has an 11 kilowatt onboard charger as standard. She came to see us for a couple of hours over the weekend and literally recharged her car completely in the time that she had, that she visited us. And she'd driven, she'd been driving, I think, probably 60, 70, 80 miles to get to us, plus all of the little things she'd done on the way to ours. And she was able to replenish that in a couple of hours. And I think really 11 kilowatts should be now the bare minimum for level 2 charging on all vehicles. I think that's in many ways more important than rapid charging, than fast charging, if you've got a good strong level 2 charging experience. In terms of everydayness though, I do think that this is something that's family friendly or for grandparents. It's got a really decent sized boot, right? 22.8 cubic feet, which is, 650-ish litres.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yeah, and it absolutely is a really good size. It has, to get on my hobby horse, the same problem that a lot of SUVs have with the sloped raked back. But I will say it's got a rear wiper, and that makes me happy.
It has a rear wiper, and kudos to Nissan for putting that on, because everybody else seems to be finding every excuse not to do it. But then I think if Nissan had not put a rear wiper on and then put this silly little cubby hole with the expensive electric actuation, I think I would have had words.
You're like, you've clearly put a motor in here, why couldn't you put one on the back?
Right. And I think a lot of automakers are trying to do that for cost-saving measures.
I think probably cost-saving and aero.
Yes. But this is a big car.
It is.
It feels like a big car. It drives like a big car.
It drives, to my mind, largely like a 60s Buick.
It feels wide. Now, I think that's an unfair characterization. It drives wide. Around town, this is a great car, and I stand by it. The steering on this around town is perfect. And you have to remember, this is a Japanese designed vehicle, and I think again it speaks to Nissan is focusing more on its home market and building cars for its home market and then expanding them and selling them globally. This is a car that I think is going to sell, and probably will sell in large volumes for many years in Japan, and it's going to be really popular with people who like a light steering touch. The Nissan Leaf had a very light steering touch. In fact, when they produced the Nissan Leaf for North America, they had to firm up the steering over the Japanese version, because the early Japanese versions had very light steering, and not everybody liked that. And I think it's a shame that Nissan is not tweaking this a little bit more for the North American market and for the European market, who like more feedback, because there's not a lot.
There is not a lot, but I was more in terms of, because of the weight of the battery, you can feel the pitch a little bit. It's really difficult for me to exactly put my finger on it.
I think some of it is the power to weight ratio, right? So this is a car that's nearly 2 metric tons.
Yeah.
Or thereabouts, high 4 to low 5,000 pound weight, depending on the variant. 2 metric tons, give or take. And the power that you get as a consequence of having all of that weight doesn't feel like it's properly proportional.
No, I think also the suspension, it could just be a hair firmer. I think that would probably fix my nausea. Is if the suspension was a hair firmer,
right,
and the damping a little stricter, because what I find is that you get a little bit of yaw, it just kind of rocks forwards and backwards, particularly if you come to a fairly rapid stop, you notice it really profoundly.
I think the way that it drives is definitely designed more for city use, though.
Yeah.
I don't think that what we're doing now is this vehicle's happy place.
No.
And I think that's okay. We have a vehicle that has a lot of interior tech, has a lot of cool features, things like the fact that the rear view camera is there if you want to fill up this, and you can put the rear seats down and you could fill this to the roof and have a huge cavernous amount of luggage space.
Yeah. And it is a pretty good rear view camera. I would just want to give them kudos for that.
It's one of the better rear view cameras on the market. You've got this lovely optional tilt and slide full length sunroof, which is lovely,
with a standard cover on it,
with a proper
really
standard cover on it. So it's not like the Mustang Mach-E where it's like it sucks to be you. This is a proper cover. We can't move it because we've got a camera back there, and we've had bad experiences in the past with roofs and cameras. We won't talk about that.
No, best not.
No, because nobody on the team would ever break a Tesla Model S roof that they borrowed from Tesla.
No.
That was me.
That wouldn't happen.
That was bad. Tesla were very understanding. But the rest of the interior, like I say, I do have some concerns though, right? There's some marking on this wood, and this has only got under 3,000 miles on the clock. That's not necessarily going to be super hard wearing, but again, it's a pre-production vehicle. I don't mind the haptic touches, you do.
I don't mind these ones so much because they're right in front of you, although I will say, it may be a pre-prod thing, yesterday when it turned the lights on automatically at kind of dusky time, the lights on the steering wheel disappeared almost completely, and it was still quite sunny, so then I just had a black steering wheel with things I couldn't read on it.
Right.
Which, driving a new vehicle, that was fun. It's these ones in particular that get to me. And
right.
The kind of, and I said we'd talk about this later, and we will, because we're here now. This touchscreen, I like heated seats, I like cooled seats. To get to them is a multi-touch experience.
So 1, okay, and then 2, and then you have to change the temperature.
Yeah.
Or you can have it auto. So you do get heated and cooled seats, but activating them is a pain in the butt. I do, though, like the fact that if I move this seat, it does come up on the dashboard, or at least it does for the driver's seat. Apparently it doesn't for the passenger seat, but it's fully adjustable here for me, and I quite like that. So I see where you're coming there. It's weird that you have a camera button here, just randomly. Camera,
yes, all the time.
For no reason.
And it doesn't do anything when you're driving, it's just
for low speed parking maneuvers.
Yeah, so why is it displayed? And again, this is all stuff that can be fixed through firmware, and it may be fixed in the production versions.
And you could quite easily move these buttons to here.
Yes.
So that you've got more easy access to them. I feel like the park auto mode, it'll do auto parking for you, and the drive mode selection buttons, I feel like Nissan expects you not to change drive mode while you're in motion, but I don't know about you. I regularly do that. Like, I regularly change my drive mode while I'm driving because I want to have a different experience depending on where I am in my journey and what type of terrain I'm facing. And just to throw in here, we've now got our efficiency up to 3 miles per kilowatt hour, which I would argue is really okay with a vehicle this size. It's not what I would look for in a vehicle, and as a consequence, I should note that my truck right now is averaging 2.6 miles per kilowatt hour. My truck, the thing in front of us, is averaging 2.6 miles per kilowatt hour, and it is much bigger and heavier.
Yeah, I mean, this is a longish stretch at 50 miles an hour, which is optimum efficiency. So this, to me, is by far the best I have seen out of this vehicle.
Let's talk about the rear. I think the headroom in the rear is pretty good.
Yeah.
Although I think that the seats could benefit from being a little bit further forwards. I did notice that my head did brush a little bit on the back. If I have my head, right against the rest. If I sit forward like I tend to in a car, it's okay. It's quite doable.
Yeah, they're pretty comfortable back there.
You get air vents back here, and you also get charging ports. But one thing I do think is weird is that it's only the top of the center console that moves forwards and backwards, right? So if I select it, I can move this forward while you're driving, by the way, which is a bit weird.
It is a bit weird.
And if the console is all the way forwards, then you can very easily access the controls here for the rear seats, and also you've got I think you've got vents here. Yeah, you can easily access the vents, and they move as well. But the bottom bit stays put. Now that makes sense because it gives foot room for the middle seat passenger if there is one. But if you move this back, you basically get between the seat cushion and the back of the armrest, you just get this. Like, I just put my hand down there and I can touch the front of the rear seat cushion and the back of the armrest. So you really don't get a whole lot of space there. The front of this armrest, though, is really nice.
Yeah.
You've got USB sockets down there for charging, and you have USB-A and USB-C. And there's also one of my favourite features of this car, which is a little tiny cord tidy that you can wrap your USB cable around.
Yeah, that's very neat.
And a little cubby for you to put your phone in.
Or your keys, in
or
this
your
case.
Keys, which Kate's got
lipstick.
down there right now. Let's talk about this, though.
Charger, very nice. Slot to put the phone in, very nice. Why is there no other storage in here?
Yeah, I think it's probably all the mechanics to move the thing forwards and backwards.
Yeah.
I would rather just have either something that I can mechanically slide forwards, which ratchets, that's how seats have been moved forwards and backwards for years before electric adjustment. And you're right, you just don't have any space in there.
Which I find it a little odd. I also think it's important to mention the sockets are down here for your USB charging. This vehicle also only has wired Android Auto. It has wireless CarPlay, but only wired Android Auto. So your phone is down here with the cable.
And my phone, being an Apple iPhone, complete with Queenie custom phone case, I can use wireless CarPlay, but you have to plug in. And I suspect there's going to be an over-the-air at some point about that. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is, while this glove box is quite good, if you have the seat far forward, it does bump your knee quite easily, and it does feel a little flimsy. It doesn't feel like it's something that I would expect. It doesn't feel like chunky.
No.
Which, for a car that this version is $62,000, give or take, is a bit weird. Let's talk about the suede.
The suede, stop stroking it.
It's nice.
It is nice. I will say the interior of this vehicle is my favourite part of it. Like, if it was stationary, if it was not a vehicle I was having to drive, the interior is absolutely lovely. The suede is a really nice touch. It has a nice feel to it. It kind of gives it a feeling of quality that when you're paying $60,000 for a car, I suppose you need that.
And of course, this version being the top trim, it's got the leather stitch steering wheel, and it's got the bottom kind of flattened out for a kind of a sporty feel. It's even got the ring in the steering wheel to let you know where the center of the wheel is, kind of, which is a kind of a race car feel to it, I guess. It does very much feel like a I've said this before, it feels like an iX for someone who can't afford an iX.
It does, and yeah, the cabin is just filled with really nice touches. I really love the call out to Japanese woodworking. Like throughout the vehicle, there's these little patterned inserts in the doors down at the center, which is illuminated down in the footwell at the front. And it's a really beautiful piece of design.
So, I think the force was with me on this one.
Well, it certainly wasn't with me.
Does that make you a Sith?
Some might have said I was some kind of Dark Lord.
Some unmentionable. Some person that should not be given the light. Oh. Anyway, I quite like this for what it is. Look, it's a pre-production car. So, Nissan were very clear with us. We had this little piece of paper that sat in the dashboard when the car was delivered saying this is a pre-production vehicle. It may not look or feel exactly like the final version. And for what it's worth, this car doesn't feel the same as the one I drove in California about 3 months ago. That car felt really sorted and really good. It was a brand new pre-production vehicle that had been, completely set up for that press drive. We were also driving on a road that had been carefully chosen for the car to show off its good bits. And obviously when you have a press car, you can do what you want with it. So we have seen more of the bad side. As a former Nissan Leaf owner, this is very familiar to me. You're not a Nissan driver.
No, and the Nissan Leaf was fine. I thought it was a pleasant vehicle to be in. And I think this will suit a lot of people, particularly once they get some of that handling a little more squared away.
Yeah, you felt the handling was really unsorted at times.
I found that it switched from oversteer to understeer. Actually, the other way around, understeer to oversteer in corners if you push it. And it's definitely not a vehicle that wants to be pushed.
It's not a driver's car.
No.
But then I've never approached this vehicle as being a driver's car. Nissan hasn't really pushed into that segment yet with EVs. It keeps promising high performance cars and then not making them. But this is a grocery getter. It's a family car. There's plenty of room in the back for your kids. It's comfortable around town. It is okay for the occasional long distance trip. But if I was doing a really super long distance trip, I'm going to have to recommend the EV6 or the Ioniq 5 over this, even though those two vehicles I think probably have less practicality in terms of interior volume and just feeling on the road. I personally like the cabin. I think it's a nice place to be.
Actually, that is probably my favourite bit of the car is, when it's stationary, I actually really like the cabin. I think the software interface will improve. It has over-the-air updates, so I expect that will get a bit better. It's not the worst that I've encountered, but it's definitely not my favourite.
I like the little cheeky motifs that remind me a lot of the iX. I talked about this when I did my first drive. I still like that. I think that little sticky out thing is overkill, but then I did at the time. I think it's quirky. I think it's clever. I do like the fact that the center console moves back.
Yeah, that's really
cool.
Nice. And it does so electrically, and you can just kind of futz with it and get it into a position that's really comfortable for you, which is good.
But again, is it necessary?
No.
Probably not. This vehicle, as we tested it today, is about $61,000 US, and that makes it a really difficult cross shop because there's a lot of other vehicles in the market at the same price that are very compelling, including the Tesla Model Y.
Yep.
And if you put aside my personal feelings towards Elon Musk, I don't want to support someone who has said the things he's been saying on social media of late, and you focus just on the car, I think the Tesla Model Y is a car that many people will prefer from the driving experience, Tesla Model Y drives far better than this.
Yeah.
From the interior comfort and just everyday life, I would choose this because the interior of the Model Y is a little too Spartan for a lot of people's needs and has some weird quirks and bugs. When we hired one in the UK recently, the rear seat warnings about there being someone on the seat and the seatbelt not plugged in happened when we had the rear seats folded down and a whole load of camera gear on top. So, but this car has some bugs too. So,
I mean, yeah, it does. I'm willing to overlook some stuff with this car because it's a pre-prod, and the Model Y having those bugs at this point in time is slightly more irritating. But yeah, if I was cross-shopping, I think it would be the Model Y for me, even though I probably, well, basically because this one makes me feel nauseous, I can't have this car.
Right.
So,
whereas for me, it doesn't make me feel nauseous.
yeah.
And I enjoy how it drives from I can get it to do what I want it to do. And I don't think you got to that point with this car.
No.
The brake automatically retracting when you lift off the throttle, when you're in e-pedal mode, is very disconcerting because it moves the brake pedal and you may not know where it is.
Yes, and you don't know where the point of onset is for it, so that's
The fact
odd.
that there's this massive bonnet and not a single bit of frunk space is not a deal breaker.
No.
But it's, couldn't you have tried a little harder?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Ford has put a frunk in its Mach-E, which is about the same size. Tesla has one in Model Y. And I would say that is fairly comparable to a Model Y's frunk. And, you know, even Kia, Hyundai with their vehicles, little tiny frunks for sure, but you still have that
You can throw
storage
your
space.
charge cable in there.
It's like I say, it's a grocery getter. It's a round towner. This is the all-wheel drive model. The snow mode gets my vote because it's a good thing. Having snow mode is definitely a bonus. I think also this might cross-shop quite well against the BZ4X that we drove recently.
My slight hesitation with it as a grocery getter is it has an 87 kilowatt hour battery pack.
Yes.
It has a range of around 300 miles. And it's not super efficient. So as your round towner, I mean, I feel like it wants to be a long distance car, and it could be. And this is where we're just never gonna quite mesh on this one, because I feel like it's so close to being really good, and then it just doesn't quite make it in any of the places that I personally care about.
Right.
And that's mine. That's on me. For other people, I understand, you know, this will be a great vehicle.
Yeah, if you don't care about the driving experience, this will be a great vehicle. Also, being a pre-production, this might not have the final version of the driver control software in it for the accelerator and the steering and the braking. It may be slightly back from that. I like the ProPilot in this. It functioned really well. I like the fact that if you are in fully level 2 hands-off mode and you come up behind a slower vehicle, it goes, hey, you should move over and overtake. Press this button, you press the button, and it will automatically move out for you. I like that. I prefer that to some other systems that just do it. It gives you more interactivity and prepares you for the move, which in a vehicle that makes you feel nauseous is a good thing, right? You don't want the car just suddenly weaving out and taking off. The load bay in the back is good. There's no underfloor storage, which I personally don't think is a good thing. I like being able to have some underfloor storage.
Yep.
I think that's a good way of keeping things safe and out of sight if you decide to leave, you know, that rear load bay open, as it were. But you know, the rear seat's comfortable enough, decent enough headroom. It's not exceptional, it's adequate.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I feel honestly that's where this car sits. And yes, I joked, the force is with me on this one. The name is stupid. It comes from that time when Nissan was doing a tie-in with Star Wars. And I was actually invited to a Star Wars premiere in LA as a guest of Nissan when they were doing a big thing for the kind of the 2 and a bit generation Leaf, and they invited us out there, and I got to dress up as a Jedi. I still have that costume, and that was a real fun experience. But at the same point, let's just call it e-4orce.
Yeah.
Not e-4orce.
Well, like I said, that's what it says in the press release.
You have to call it e-4orce.
Yeah.
And that's like someone in the marketing department getting a little bit...
They got a little bit wary of people going, how do you pronounce this? Is this e-4orce? What kind of 4orce is this?
We haven't really had a whole chance to do a whole lot of rapid charging with this. Of course, it's now CCS rather than CHAdeMO, but I have to bring everybody's attention to the fact that the charging port is in completely the wrong location for left-hand drive markets. So as a Japanese car, the charge port door is on the driver's side A-pillar. In North America, Europe, and large swathes of the world where everybody drives on the left, it's on the wrong side.
Yes.
Now, that might not be an issue, but when you consider that most charging stations have been built to accommodate cars that have their charge port doors on the rear right of the car or the front left of the car. Those are the 2 primary locations for charging, and Nissan, for whatever reason, did it the other way around.
Yeah.
It could have just easily put another charge port door on this side, but it didn't, and I feel that that's going to cause some confusion and some headaches for early adopters of this vehicle, and also other people trying to use charging stations, because if you pull in nose first, you're going to be using the opposite charging connector to the one you need. If you try and use a Tesla supercharger with this, it's going to cause fun. If you try and use like an EA station or some of the Ionity stations in Europe, the cables are just not going to reach unless you park over one space. And I think we need to highlight that as a really bad bit of design on Nissan's part, when the rest of the industry have pretty much homologated left A-pillar, rear quarter panel on the right, or in the nose.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting decision, and I think it is going to lead some drivers to have some difficulty charging. Although, again, you just told me it's a grocery getter, so that won't be a problem.
Well, okay, grocery getter, OAP car. It feels like it feels like a poor man's iX.
It does.
In more ways than one. I still really like this car. I'm still going to recommend it to people who enjoy the Nissan driving experience.
Yeah.
The steering is very light, but that's a Nissan EV thing.
The brake pedal, very light.
The turning circle, awesome. Comparable to the Volkswagen ID4. I think these two, I think Volkswagen still may have it slightly,
Yeah.
but this is one of the more tighter turning cars, which for this size and this segment, many of the competitors just don't do corners very well.
And on a 4-wheel drive.
And on a 4-wheel drive, which I think is, I don't think anybody else does it. Maybe Volkswagen with the ID4 gets it that time. So there are some good bits, there are some bad bits, but for the first time in history, you and I have disagreed about a car. And honestly, I think that makes me kind of happy, because it proves that we're not pushing an agenda.
No.
We are subjectively reacting very differently to this car. And maybe my first time behind the wheel was influenced by the fact that I was in a nice warm place, driving around vineyards in California, on nice flat roads, not twisty mountain passes like we are now. So there we have it.
And on that note, we're done with today's video. If you have comments, drop us a polite note in the comments below, our Discord chat room, on Mastodon, or if you're a Patreon supporter, in the comments there. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links below to regularly support us with a YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and Swag store, as well as that aforementioned Mastodon server.
Scrolling on our right is the list of amazing charged up supporters, and shout outs go out to our V to G Patreon supporters. They are Pedro Moro Pinheiro, Alan Tupper, Andrew Martin, Bennett Elder, Brophy Wolf, Chris Maxwell, Cyprian Laplace, Dan Blair, Gordon C, Hey Esker, John Trammell, Kyle Fox, Mark Eggleton, Peter Dillinger, Regine Fellows, Sean Tucker, Stefan Fremgen, Stephen Williams, Tesla in the Gong, Paul Bricknell, Tony Moss, Carl Hodgson, Chris Centaur, Denny Hyde, Lance Schlall, Linda Irish, Mike Weeder and Paul Nelson. And finally, big thanks to our off-grid supporters. They are Paul Conway, Kevin Burrowbridge, Stephen O'Donoghue, Jim Burness, Robert Flannery, Aaron Hahn, Ellery Hansley, Rory Litwin, JP Fagerback, Dave Kitchen, Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, Chris and Michael Johnson, Clay Witt, CPU Freak 101, Eric Knack, Joe Bresney, Joe Hughes, John L. Henderson, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Nigel S., Reggie Watts, Will Graylin, and of course,
Ian!
Don't forget that we make videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday on the main channel, plus on Sunday.
There's a Sunday musing and take two.
A chicken and garden update.
On take two. Oh, yes, yes.
And with that, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. We will see you soon. And as always, keep evolving.